Thanks, Alex, for a fantastic talk and for warming up the audience. My name is Michael Milford. Thank you very much to the organisers for kindly inviting me to present. And in the 90s, we had vehicles that could drive almost error-free across entire countries on highways. Now, would we have trusted this as a commercially deployed technology? No. But it's important to note that for 30 years we've had tech that could do a lot of the things that you're seeing autonomous vehicles doing today. Really, the modern birth of autonomous vehicles happened about 20 years ago when DARPA, the big defense agency in the US, ran a series of grand challenges that really captivated the world's imagination. Now, obviously, if you're that conservative, your autonomous vehicle is not going to move anywhere. And one of the things that's really important to note is you can build an autonomous vehicle now that is completely and utterly safe, but it would be incredibly frustrating as a ride experience because it will never move, especially if you're trying to drive through a crowded city. One of the other learnings from this field has been that it's not just enough to detect people or other cars or cyclists. You have to infer and predict what the things in the scene or the objects in the scene are going to do. And this is incredibly important and, again, incredibly difficult. So if you're driving through the city and you see 20 people on their phones, looking at their phones 17 centimeters from the edge of the curb at a light, people are making all sorts of inferences that those people are suddenly not going to run out into the intersection until the light has changed. Again, to teach an autonomous vehicle to drive past those people with a gap of 20 to 30 centimeters in some cases is an incredibly difficult technical problem. It's very expensive. So there was a point in time, and I know because I was living through this, where every week if you came from a brand name university, especially out of the US, there was a new startup company that got $5 or $10 million of pre-seed or seed money just thrown at them because they were doing something in autonomous vehicles, which was a fun and exciting time to be like a young researcher exiting, say, your PhD. Autonomous vehicles are tougher than people thought. It's very expensive to develop them. It's very expensive to run them. I'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the byproducts of this is it's very hard to run a small operation unless you're carving up a tiny niche. So there's been a lot of consolidation. We have Waymo out of Google, we have Cruise, we have Aurora, we have Tesla, which is sort of the dark horse in this race. And then we have lesser known but still potentially impactful entities out of countries like China. So, as things slowed down, people talked about pivots. So everyone was thinking, okay, maybe we're not going to have billions of robo-taxis earning us $7 trillion in the next few years. What are we going to do instead? There's lots of pivots: autonomous shuttles, autonomous delivery vehicles, robo-taxis, autonomous freight, off-road, mining, agriculture, and of course, defense. These are all interesting alternatives. They're getting more attention now that the hype around on-road robo-taxis has arguably slowed down a bit, but they're not generally as incredibly lucrative as the initial numbers fueling the hype around on-road robo-taxis. One of the other aspects to understand around alternatives is what I call technology crutches. So there are certain ways when technologies inevitably don't live up to their hype that you can compensate for their shortcomings. So one of the shortcomings that's often is that technology fails. In some areas, a human can intervene. That is not viable for an autonomous vehicle making moment-to-moment decisions. You do not have enough time for a remote operator to dial in, get situational awareness and make a decision. You have to decide in the next 300 milliseconds what to do. So that is a crutch that will not work. But for an autonomous delivery vehicle, which is moving slowly, you just stop it and then someone dials in. So it depends on the application. One of the hilarious things is that there has been a lot of, and continues to be a lot of confounding. So an electric vehicle is not an autonomous vehicle. A lot of the benefits ascribed to autonomous vehicles are actually about having electric vehicles. They have nothing to do with autonomy. It is easier to build an autonomous vehicle out of an electric vehicle than a nice combustion engine vehicle, but they're not the same thing, to state the obvious. Centralized ride-sharing transport services, which mean people give up their cars, is not an autonomous vehicle. So a lot of the benefits ascribed to autonomous vehicles are actually about getting a lot of the cars off the road and having centralized mobility options for people. It has nothing explicitly to do with autonomy. Autonomy would be nice because it makes some aspects of the problem easier, but it's not the critical component. The critical component is people giving up private ownership of cars, especially in the inner city. Flying cars are not autonomous vehicles. This is especially topical because flying cars are back on the upswing in terms of their interest and popularity, which is really interesting. And it's edifying to compare these situations. So an autonomous vehicle, if we get autonomous vehicles wherever taxis everywhere, at a 30,000 foot view, it's a delta from the status quo. If you look down at the city from above, there's still vehicles carrying people around, it's just that they're autonomous. There's some changes in traffic patterns, but it's essentially a substantial delta from what we already have. The model where a small number of very rich people pay a lot of money for an autonomous vehicle and everyone else drives doesn't really make a lot of financial sense, or at least I haven't seen a financial model where that makes sense. There's some impact on mass transit. Autonomous vehicles, even in the most ideal scenarios, will not solve mass transit issues, but it could have some impact on the mass transit issues of the city. Interaction with people and other vehicles and cyclists is the major challenge, and we don't have a proven financial model for these yet. We may have one soon. Flying cars, they're the new thing, although we have had helicopters for wealthy business people before. There is a precedent of a commercially viable model for a very small subset of the market, which has already been proven. This isn't very attractive for people who are trying to solve citywide transport problems, but there is an economic model that works. It's a limited scale. Even if you have lots of these things flying around, it's not going to solve or come close to solving your mass transit issues. Their main problem is physics, cost per mile of transport per passenger, fail-safes, energy sources, and so on. Very limited trials today. We don't have the sort of data on their viability that we have with autonomous vehicles.